In this week's LEGO City update, I'll be building a completely new house, extending the money laundry story. Then I'll be continuing the work on the future harbor, as well as building my so far craziest tree. So I've challenged myself to build the most realistic looking LEGO tree possible. And what I've started off doing is building in those reddish brown arches in order to represent the individual branches of the tree, and then build in those small grapplers to now hold the limb elements built onto those small 1x1 plate modifieds. I'm only attaching the limb elements via this one middle stud that exists. I was a bit worried that it might not be stable enough, but at least when it comes to connecting the limb elements without anything built onto them, this was more than stable enough. I was honestly a bit surprised by that. And now this is what I've continued doing. I've tried to fit as many limb elements as possible onto the branches of the tree and eventually got to something that actually already looked like a tree. Honestly, at this stage, if you simply put on more limb elements onto the tree, you can probably already place that into the city and be satisfied with that. But that wasn't enough for me. I've decided to add as many stems with those leaves attached to them as possible. I'll show you the final result in just a bit, but before placing the tree into the LEGO City, I of course have to create the necessary space for that. So this is what I'm doing right now. I'm continuing the tiling throughout my LEGO City. At this point, I was still exclusively using 1x2 dark bluish gray flat tiles with a few jumper plates mixed into them in order to fix the minifigures. But later on in this update, you'll actually see me experimenting with more interesting looking patterns for the tiling. So stay tuned for that. For now, this is the base that the tree will then be placed on in just a second. I've also designed a few more market stalls based on your ideas and suggestions down in the comment section. I'll show you the new stalls at the end of this video in detail once again. Then I've worked on a few micro stories in the front of the LEGO City. For example, right there you can see a young couple. Then I've decided to add two men greeting each other from a distance so that you can actually see all those small stories right in front of the LEGO City. And then once again, I'll show you this at the end of this video. This is another market stall I've added. And now the part we've all been waiting for. I'm adding the new tree into the LEGO City. As you can see, I've added, well, about 80 to 90 of those individual leaves. Every single leaf costs about 50 to 60 cents depending on the color. The bright green leaves are around 55 cents and the dark green leaves about 60 cents depending on the store where you order them. There is, however, a cheaper alternative to the whole tree build, and this is by adding those normal small leaves. And as you can see, I've built a second tree solely with those leaves and it looks perfectly fine. I'm adding that one next to the pine trees I've built last video because that also fits the scale better than those other small trees I've distributed throughout the LEGO City. Next up, it was time for a new building. I've started by checking the exact size and layout of the building itself. Color-wise, I've decided to use dark red mixed with white. The whole building is based on these Norwegian, Swedish houses, since the entire area around the harbor is inspired by Northern European countries. I've later on in this video, as you'll be able to see, actually modified the building because I thought it was a bit too boring simply having 4 flat walls with 3 windows added to them, and therefore I've then extended one side of the walls by one stud. The more interesting and also more time-consuming part was the roof. I've used over 600 of those 1x1 cheese slopes in black since they were incredibly inexpensive on Bricklink, about 1 cent per piece. So although the roof itself uses up more pieces than some LEGO sets, I still managed to keep the cost quite low. Still, I have to say that after adding over 600 of these 1x1 slopes, I was quite happy as soon as the roof was finished. As you can see, this is what the new building looks like. And now, as always, when I finish the building, it's time for the most rewarding part, building it into the LEGO City itself. I started off by measuring the corners, then placed studs beneath them. Of course, I won't be tiling the entire area beneath the building because that would just be completely wasted time. And now here you can see what I've mentioned earlier with the different tiling I was talking about. Every now and then I'm adding plates into the 1x2 tiling because that firstly looks much more interesting. Secondly, it has the additional benefit of me not having to add jumper plates and planning ahead where the minifigures will then be placed into the city, because I obviously have so many studs available throughout the tiling that I can spontaneously choose where the minifigures are being placed. The only thing that I'm not quite sure about is how I'm creating that transition from the area with the studs to the area next to it, consisting solely out of tiles. But I'll discuss that at the end of this video with you. In the meantime, I'm finishing off the last remaining spot You can believe me, this week was really annoying with all the tiling going on, so I was really satisfied when that was done. Next up, it's time for the interior of the new building. I've covered the entire floor of the building with 1x4 plate modifieds with those 2 studs and then the flat part in the middle, and then 1x2 dark brown tiles so that it looks like a wooden floor. That was my goal, and with all those studs now being available, I could then place different barrels and containers into the corners. I was doing the exact same thing on the outside of the building, so the whole area doesn't look as empty as before that. All those different barrels also add contrast to the area, which was another upside of doing that. And then as soon as I'm adding minifigures, the entire area actually comes to life. Now onto the storytelling part, and this is always the most exciting part. As you might know by now, I have this story going on in my Lego city with the mafia printing fake money and then distributing it in the city. And I thought, in addition to the money printing and the office of the mafia boss, in case you've missed that Lego City update, it was time to extend the storyline into the harbor and specifically into that very building we've just created. So my idea was to have a sort of weapon trade that was going on. So the mafia was actually scamming some business partners who delivered weapons via a boat, since we are directly at the harbor obviously, and the mafia boss was then actually giving his business partner, who provided the weapons, fake money. That was my idea of that story, and obviously the story will be extended as soon as we start building the first boats. I think in order to take a closer look at the story, I'll show you that live in the city. So let's first of all take a look into the new building. As we remove the roof, we can see 2 bodyguards actually guarding the trade. Obviously, when we have such a risky trade between 2 mafia bosses going on, there's quite some high security. Then we have those 2 guys carrying weapons, and then the workers outside are actually the exact same type of workers who are also working in the factory up there where the fake money is being printed. So these are basically undercover bodyguards for the whole trade that's going on. Since I was also talking quite a lot about the tiling throughout this Lego City update, here you can see the different studs mixed into the 1x2 flat tiles. And over here it's simply without studs, only the flat tiles. And if you ask me, I honestly prefer this region right here. It looks a bit more interesting, and as I've talked about during the update, it's also much more practical. Over here we now have a market stall where cheese is being sold, and back there, quite fitting actually, there's milk that's being sold. Both ideas were from the comment section. If you have any other ideas, not only for the market stalls, as always, leave them in the comment section. Over here I'm currently thinking about the exact placement of the restaurant. I was actually thinking about adding an outdoor area above the harbor, but I'm not quite sure about that. I firstly have to build the harbor down there before deciding anything. Then, although this tree isn't placed into the city yet, this was another build I tried out. It's a mixture between those trees right here and then using the leaves I've also used with a big tree. By the way, this tree cost me over 100 euros in comparison to this tree, which was much cheaper. I'm not quite sure because I didn't count the leaves on that one. But obviously when the leaves cost a fraction of the price than with those other ones, it doesn't really matter how many you use. This one is much, much cheaper. With that being said, that's it for this week's Lego City update. I really hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again in the next one.